The steady hum of a submarine's engines filled the air as Warrant Officer Nobuo Fujita stood on the deck, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The date was September 17, 1942, and the young pilot was about to embark on a mission that would etch his name into the annals of history. The salty Pacific breeze whipped across his face as he contemplated the gravity of the task ahead. In a matter of hours, he would become the only Axis pilot to bomb the continental United States during World War II. As the submarine surfaced 20 miles off the Oregon coast, Fujita's heart raced with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The sea churned around them, and the sky above was a palette of grays and blues. He watched intently as a small E-14Y seaplane, lovingly nicknamed the Glenn by Allied forces, was carefully extracted from its watertight hangar and assembled on the deck. This aircraft, with its wingspan of just 36 feet, was about to carry him into enemy territory on a mission that seemed almost impossible. Fujita's mind wandered to the weeks of intense preparation that had led to this moment. He recalled the long hours spent poring over maps, memorizing coastal features, and studying weather patterns. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him like a physical force. He was not just a pilot on this day. He was the embodiment of Japan's determination to strike fear into the heart of America. As he climbed into the cockpit, Fujita ran through his pre-flight checks with meticulous care. His hands, steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins, moved over the controls with practiced ease. Beside him sat Petty Officer Shoji Okuda, his trusted observer and bombardier. Their eyes met briefly, a silent understanding passing between them. They were about to make history, for better or worse. The launch from the submarine was a heart-stopping moment as the catapult propelled them forward. Fujita felt a familiar surge of power as the engine roared to life. The little seaplane bounced once, twice on the waves before lifting into the air. They were airborne, alone in the vast expanse of the Pacific, with nothing but their wits and their mission to guide them. As they approached the Oregon coastline, Fujita marveled at the lush green forest that seemed to stretch endlessly below them. It was a stark contrast to the cityscapes and rice paddies of his homeland. The beauty of the landscape was not lost on him, even as he steeled himself for the task at hand. These forests, so verdant and alive, were his target. The incendiary bombs nestled in the plane's belly were designed to ignite these woods, to bring the terror of war to American soil. The flight was fraught with challenges, navigating by dead reckoning. Fujita had to contend with cloudy skies and the ever-present risk of detection. Every moment brought with it the possibility of American planes appearing on the horizon or anti-aircraft fire erupting from below. The tension in the cockpit was palpable, broken only by the occasional terse communication between Fujita and Okuda. As they neared their target, Mount Emily in Oregon's Siskiyou National Forest, Fujita's training took over. He focused on maintaining a steady course as Okuda prepared to release their payload. The moment of truth arrived with startling swiftness. At Okuda's signal, Fujita opened the bomb bay doors. 268 pounds of incendiary bombs plummeted towards the forest below. The explosions, when they came, seemed almost anticlimactic from their altitude. Small puffs of smoke rose from the forest canopy, quickly dissipating in the wind. Fujita banked the plane sharply, his heart pounding as he half expected to see American fighters rising to meet them. But the skies remained clear. Their mission, against all odds, had been accomplished. The return flight to the submarine was tense, each minute stretching into what felt like hours. Fujita's mind raced with questions. Had they succeeded in starting the massive forest fires their superiors had envisioned? Would this attack strike fear into the American people as intended? As the submarine came into view, a mix of relief and uncertainty washed over him. They had made it back safely, but the true impact of their mission remained to be seen. In the days that followed, as their submarine patrolled the Pacific coast, Fujita and his crew waited anxiously for news of their attack's aftermath. They scanned American radio broadcasts, searching for any mention of fires raging through Oregon's forests. But as days turned into weeks, it became clear that their mission had not achieved its intended effect. The bombs, while they had exploded, failed to ignite the devastating wildfires the Japanese high command had hoped for. This realization weighed heavily on Fujita. He had risked everything, flown into the heart of enemy territory, only to have his mission amount to little more than a footnote in the vast narrative of the war. Yet, even as disappointment settled in, a small part of him felt a sense of relief. The forests he had marveled at from above remained largely unscathed, their beauty preserved. Fujita's experience over Oregon would not be his last mission of the war, but it would prove to be the one that defined his life in ways he could never have imagined. As the conflict raged on, he continued to serve his country with dedication, flying reconnaissance missions and participating in some of the war's most harrowing naval battles. Throughout these years, the memory of that flight over Oregon stayed with him. It was a constant reminder of the strange twists of fate that war could bring, and of the shared humanity that existed even between enemies. Little did Fujita know that this mission, which seemed to have failed in its immediate objectives, would one day pave the way for an extraordinary journey of reconciliation and peace. If you're captivated by Fujita's daring mission and the unexpected turn his life would take, make sure to subscribe to our channel. We'll be diving deeper into the personal stories that shaped World War II and its aftermath. As the tide of war turned against Japan, Fujita found himself witnessing the gradual unraveling of everything he had fought for. The once unstoppable Japanese war machine began to falter under the relentless pressure of American industrial might and military strategy. From his vantage point as a naval aviator, Fujita saw firsthand the toll the war was taking on his comrades and his country. The final months of the conflict were a time of increasing desperation for Japan. Fujita, like many of his fellow servicemen, was prepared to fight to the bitter end. The concept of surrender was anathema to their warrior ethos. Yet, as news filtered through of devastating American bombing raids on Japanese cities, culminating in the atomic destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the reality of defeat became impossible to ignore. August 15, 1945, is a day that would be forever etched in Fujita's memory. As Emperor Hirohito's voice crackled over the radio, announcing Japan's surrender, Fujita felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. The emperor's words, delivered in formal Japanese that many citizens struggled to understand, shattered the illusions of victory that had sustained them through years of hardship. For Fujita, like millions of his countrymen, the days following the surrender were a time of profound shock and disorientation. The values and beliefs that had guided him throughout the war suddenly seemed hollow. As American occupation forces arrived on Japanese soil, Fujita grappled with a maelstrom of emotions: shame at their defeat, relief that the killing had ended, and uncertainty about what the future held for him and his nation. The transition to peace was not easy. Fujita, along with other military personnel, was required to turn over his weapons and uniform. The rituals and routines that had structured his life for years were abruptly swept away. He found himself adrift in a changed world, struggling to find his place in a Japan that was rapidly being reshaped under American influence. In the immediate aftermath of the war, survival became Fujita's primary concern. Like many veterans, he faced the challenge of finding work in a shattered economy. The skills that had made him an elite pilot were of little use in a country focused on rebuilding. He took on odd jobs, from manual labor to clerical work, anything to put food on the table and contribute to his family's survival. As Japan slowly began to recover under American occupation, Fujita watched his country transform. The militaristic ideology that had dominated his youth was replaced by a new focus on democracy and pacifism. Western influences began to permeate Japanese society, from music and fashion to political institutions. For Fujita, this period was one of intense self-reflection. He began to question the beliefs that had led him and his nation into war, grappling with feelings of guilt and responsibility for his actions. It was during these years of soul-searching that Fujita's thoughts often returned to that mission over Oregon. The forest he had tried to set ablaze became a symbol in his mind, a symbol of the senselessness of war and the beauty of a natural world that transcended national boundaries. He began to see his survival not just as chance, but as an opportunity to make amends, to contribute to a more peaceful world. As Japan reemerged on the international stage in the 1950s and 60s, a new spirit of reconciliation began to take hold. Former enemies were becoming economic partners and even allies. It was in this climate of changing attitudes that an extraordinary invitation reached Fujita in 1962. The people of Brookings, Oregon, the very town he had bombed 2 decades earlier, were inviting him to visit as an honored guest. The invitation came as a shock to Fujita. His first reaction was disbelief, followed quickly by apprehension. How could the people of Brookings possibly want to welcome the man who had attacked their town? What reception could he expect in a country he had once sought to terrorize? The prospect of facing those he had considered enemies filled him with a complex mix of emotions, fear, shame, but also a glimmer of hope. As Fujita contemplated the invitation, he was forced to confront the memories of war that he had long tried to suppress. Nightmares of aerial combat and the faces of fallen comrades haunted his sleep. He spent long hours in quiet reflection, often walking alone in the parks of his hometown, wrestling with the decision before him. It was during one of these solitary walks that Fujita came to a realization. This invitation, as daunting as it seemed, offered a chance for something he had scarcely dared to hope for: redemption. Here was an opportunity not just to apologize for his actions, but to play a part, however small, in healing the wounds of war. With a mixture of trepidation and resolve, Fujita accepted the invitation. The journey to Oregon in 1962 was one of the most challenging experiences of Fujita's life. As his plane crossed the Pacific, following a route not dissimilar to the one his submarine had taken 2 decades earlier, he was assailed by doubts. What right did he have to ask for forgiveness? How could he possibly explain his actions to the people of Brookings? Fujita had prepared for his visit with great care. In his luggage was a precious cargo: his family's katana, a samurai sword that had been passed down through generations. This sword, a symbol of his family's warrior heritage, was to be his offering of peace. He had decided that if his reception in Brookings was hostile, he would use the sword to commit ritual suicide, taking responsibility for his wartime actions in the most final way possible. As the plane touched down in Oregon, Fujita's heart raced. The moment of truth had arrived. He stepped off the aircraft, bracing himself for anger or resentment. Instead, he was greeted with a sight that moved him to tears. A group of Brookings residents, holding signs of welcome, their faces open and friendly. The warmth of his reception was overwhelming. Fujita, who had come prepared for rejection, found himself embraced by the very community he had once sought to harm. Over the following days, he was given tours of the town, invited into people's homes, and treated not as a former enemy, but as an honored guest. The focal point of Fujita's visit was the ceremony in which he presented his family's katana to the town of Brookings. Standing before a gathered crowd, his voice thick with emotion, Fujita spoke of his regret for his wartime actions and his deep gratitude for the town's forgiveness. As he handed over the sword, he pledged that no member of his family would ever again take up arms against the United States. The sword, he said, would stand as a symbol of peace between their two nations. The impact of this gesture was profound. Many in the audience were moved to tears, recognizing the deep significance of Fujita's offering. This moment of reconciliation, played out in a small Oregon town, seemed to heal wounds that had festered for 2 decades. Fujita's visit to Brookings marked a turning point in his life. He returned to Japan a changed man, deeply affected by the forgiveness and humanity he had encountered. The burden of guilt he had carried for so long began to lift, replaced by a new sense of purpose. He became determined to work towards peace and understanding between Japan and the United States. In the years that followed, Fujita returned to Brookings several times. Each visit deepened the bonds he had formed with the town and its people. He sponsored student exchange programs, allowing young people from Brookings to visit Japan and experience its culture firsthand. In a poignant act of symbolism, He planted trees in the forest he had once tried to destroy, turning an act of wartime destruction into one of peace and renewal. Fujita's story began to spread, capturing imaginations on both sides of the Pacific. He became a living symbol of reconciliation, his journey from enemy pilot to ambassador of peace offering hope that even the deepest wounds of war could heal. School children in Brookings learned about his story, and Japanese tourists began to visit the town, drawn by this unique tale of forgiveness and friendship. As the years passed, Fujita watched with satisfaction as relations between Japan and the United States grew stronger. The two nations, once bitter enemies, became close allies and economic partners. He saw his own story as a small but significant part of this larger reconciliation, a testament to the power of human connection to overcome the divisions of war. In 1997, at the age of 85, Fujita made what he knew would likely be his final visit to Brookings. His health was failing, but his determination to make the journey one last time was unshakable. The town welcomed him as they always had, but this time with a special announcement. They were making him an honorary citizen of Brookings. This final honor moved Fujita deeply. Standing before the town council, his voice wavering with age and emotion, he expressed his gratitude not just for this recognition, but for the decades of friendship that had transformed his life. He spoke of how the people of Brookings had taught him the true meaning of forgiveness and how their acceptance had allowed him to forgive himself. As Fujita prepared to return to Japan, he knew that his life's journey had come full circle. The young pilot who had once flown over Oregon with bombs of war now left as an ambassador of peace, leaving behind a legacy of reconciliation that would outlive him. Nobuo Fujita passed away on September 30th, 1997, shortly after returning to Japan. In accordance with his wishes, some of his ashes were scattered in the forest near Brookings by his daughter, Yuriko Asakura. It was a fitting final chapter to an extraordinary life story, returning him to the place that had played such a pivotal role in his journey. The legacy of Nobuo Fujita and the town of Brookings continues to resonate today. Their story serves as a powerful reminder of the possibility of forgiveness and the enduring strength of the human spirit. In a world still scarred by conflict, the unlikely friendship between a Japanese pilot and an American town offers a beacon of hope. As we reflect on Fujita's remarkable journey, we're reminded of the complexities of war and peace. His story challenges us to look beyond labels of enemy or ally, to see the shared humanity in those we once considered foes. It shows us that even in the aftermath of conflict, there is potential for understanding, for forgiveness, and for profound personal transformation. Fujita's life also stands as a testament to the power of individual actions to effect change. His decision to accept the invitation to Brookings, to offer a sincere apology, and to dedicate his later years to fostering understanding between Japan and the United States had an impact far beyond what he could have imagined. It reminds us that peace is not just the absence of war, but an active process of building bridges and healing wounds. For the people of Brookings, Fujita's story became an integral part of their town's identity. The katana he gifted them remains on display in the local library, a tangible reminder of the power of reconciliation. The trees he planted continue to grow, silent witnesses to a remarkable transformation from enmity to friendship. In Japan, Fujita's story has become a powerful example of reconciliation and the importance of facing the past honestly. His journey from wartime pilot to peace ambassador resonates with many Japanese citizens grappling with their nation's wartime history. Schools and community groups often share his story as a way to discuss war, peace, and the possibility of redemption. The impact of Fujita's story extends far beyond the personal. It serves as a microcosm of the larger reconciliation between Japan and the United States in the post-war years. The transformation of these two nations from bitter enemies to close allies is one of the most remarkable diplomatic achievements of the 20th century. Fujita's individual journey of reconciliation with Brookings parallels this larger narrative, providing a human face to the abstract concepts of international relations and diplomacy. As we delve deeper into Fujita's experiences, It's crucial to understand the context of his early years and the society that shaped him. Born in 1911 in Ibaraki Prefecture, Fujita came of age during a time of rising militarism in Japan. The nation, having rapidly modernized following the Meiji Restoration, was asserting itself as a major power on the world stage. Young Nobuo, like many of his generation, was raised in an atmosphere that glorified martial virtues and unquestioning loyalty to the emperor. The education system of the time emphasized Japan's unique destiny and the need for expansion to secure resources for the growing empire. Military service was seen not just as a duty, but as the highest form of patriotism. Fujita's decision to join the Navy in 1933 was thus a natural choice for a young man of his time. He excelled in his training, particularly in aviation, demonstrating the skill and dedication that would eventually lead to his selection for the Oregon bombing mission. His early years in the Navy coincided with Japan's increasing military adventures on the Asian mainland, including the invasion of China in 1937. It's important to note that Fujita, like many of his comrades, did not see these actions as aggressive at the time. The prevailing narrative in Japan portrayed these military campaigns as necessary for the nation's survival and prosperity. The young pilot, steeped in the ideology of the time, believed wholeheartedly in the righteousness of Japan's cause. This background helps us understand the mindset with which Fujita approached his mission to bomb Oregon. It wasn't personal animosity or a desire for destruction that motivated him, but a deep-seated belief in his duty to his country and emperor. This context makes his later transformation all the more remarkable. The years immediately following the war were a time of profound change and soul-searching for Fujita. As Japan underwent a radical transformation under American occupation, he, like many of his countrymen, was forced to confront the realities of their nation's actions during the war. The war crimes trials, the dismantling of the military, and the rewriting of Japan's constitution all contributed to a seismic shift in the national psyche. For Fujita, this period was marked by intense personal reflection. The values and beliefs that had guided him throughout his military career were suddenly called into question. He grappled with feelings of guilt, shame, and disillusionment. The mission to Oregon, which had once seemed a point of pride, now weighed heavily on his conscience. It was during these difficult years that Fujita began the long process of reevaluating his past and seeking a new purpose. He took whatever work he could find in the struggling post-war economy, from manual labor to office jobs. These experiences brought him into contact with ordinary Japanese citizens who were also struggling to rebuild their lives, helping him to develop a new perspective on the true costs of war. Fujita's journey towards reconciliation was not a straight path. There were moments of doubt, setbacks, and lingering pain. The invitation from Brookings in 1962 came at a time when he was still wrestling with his past. His initial hesitation to accept the invitation reflected not just fear of how he would be received, but also his own unresolved feelings about his wartime actions. The decision to accept the invitation was a turning point in Fujita's life. It required immense courage to face those he had once sought to harm. The fact that he was prepared to commit ritual suicide if his apology was not accepted demonstrates the depth of his feelings and the seriousness with which he approached this act of reconciliation. As we approach a pivotal moment in our narrative, now is the perfect time to ensure you don't miss any part of this incredible story. Subscribe to our channel to follow Fujita's journey and discover more tales of war, peace, and the indomitable human spirit. Fujita's first visit to Brookings in 1962 was an emotionally charged experience. As he stepped off the plane, he was prepared for anger, resentment, or at best, cool politeness. Instead, he was met with genuine warmth and curiosity. The people of Brookings, rather than dwelling on past hostilities, saw an opportunity for healing and understanding. One of the most poignant moments of this visit was Fujita's meeting with the firefighters who had responded to his bombing 2 decades earlier. These men, who had once rushed to extinguish the fires he had tried to start, now shook his hand and shared their own memories of that day. Their ability to move beyond the past and embrace Fujita as a fellow human being deeply moved the former pilot. During his stay, Fujita was given a tour of the forest he had bombed. Standing amidst the towering trees, many of which had been mere saplings during the war, he was struck by the resilience of nature and the passage of time. It was here, surrounded by the quiet strength of the forest, that Fujita felt the full weight of his past actions and the miraculous nature of the forgiveness he was being offered. The ceremony in which Fujita presented his family's katana to the town of Brookings was the emotional climax of his visit. As he stood before the gathered crowd, the sword heavy in his hands, Fujita struggled to find the words to express his remorse and gratitude. When he finally spoke, his voice trembling with emotion, the sincerity of his apology was unmistakable. "I do not presume to ask for your forgiveness," Fujita said, "but I offer this sword as a token of my deep regret and my fervent hope for peace between our nations." As he handed over the katana, a profound silence fell over the assembly. Many in the audience were moved to tears, recognizing the deep significance of this gesture in Japanese culture. The mayor of Brookings, accepting the sword on behalf of the town, spoke of the power of reconciliation and the importance of building bridges between former enemies. His words, "Mr. Fujita, you bombed us once. Today, you have bombed us again. With your kindness, captured the spirit of the moment and would be long remembered by all who were present." This visit marked the beginning of a deep and lasting connection between Fujita and the town of Brookings. As he boarded the plane to return to Japan, Fujita felt a profound sense of transformation. The weight of guilt he had carried for 2 decades had begun to lift, replaced by a new sense of purpose. He knew that his journey of reconciliation was far from over. In many ways, it was just beginning. Upon his return to Japan, Fujita found himself viewing his homeland through new eyes. The streets of Tokyo, once so familiar, now seemed to pulse with unrealized potential for peace and international understanding. He began to see his role not just as a former pilot seeking personal redemption, but as a bridge between 2 cultures that had once been locked in bitter conflict. In the months following his visit to Brookings, Fujita became increasingly vocal about his experiences. He began by sharing his story with friends and family, many of whom were astonished by the forgiveness he had encountered in America. Some of his former military colleagues were initially skeptical, even critical of what they saw as Fujita's betrayal of their shared past. But as they listened to his impassioned accounts of the kindness he had experienced in Brookings, many found their own perspectives beginning to shift. Fujita's story soon caught the attention of local media in Japan. A small newspaper in his hometown ran an article about his visit to Brookings, which was picked up by larger national publications. Suddenly, Fujita found himself in the spotlight, fielding interview requests from journalists eager to hear about the former enemy pilot who had returned to America to apologize. This newfound attention was not always comfortable for Fujita. A naturally humble man, he struggled with the idea of becoming a public figure. However, he recognized the power of his story to promote understanding and reconciliation. With some trepidation, he began to accept invitations to speak at schools, community centers, and peace forums across Japan. One particularly memorable speaking engagement took place at a high school in Nagasaki in 1964. As Fujita stood before an auditorium filled with teenagers, he was acutely aware that many of their parents and grandparents had experienced the horrors of atomic warfare firsthand. He spoke softly but passionately about his own wartime experiences, the bombing mission over Oregon, and his transformative visit to Brookings. As he concluded his talk, a young girl raised her hand. "Fujita-san," she asked, her voice trembling slightly, "how can you forgive the Americans for what they did to our country?" The auditorium fell silent, all eyes on Fujita as he considered his response. After a moment, Fujita replied, "It's not about forgiving or forgetting. It's about understanding. The people of Brookings showed me that it's possible to acknowledge the past while working towards a better future. They taught me that the cycle of hatred and revenge can be broken, but it takes courage and compassion from both sides." His words had a profound impact on the students. Many approached him after the talk, eager to share their own thoughts on war, peace, and reconciliation. For Fujita, these interactions with young people became one of the most rewarding aspects of his new role as a peace advocate. As Fujita's reputation grew, he began to receive invitations from organizations outside Japan. In 1965, he was invited to speak at a peace conference in San Francisco. This would be his first return to the United States since his visit to Brookings, and he approached it with a mix of excitement and apprehension. The conference brought together peace activists, scholars, and former military personnel from around the world. Fujita's panel, titled Enemies No More: Personal Journeys of Reconciliation, also included a former American POW who had forgiven his Japanese captors and a German resistance fighter who had worked to rebuild relationships with Jewish communities after the war. As Fujita shared his story, he was struck by the commonalities in their experiences. Despite coming from different sides of the conflict, they all spoke of the transformative power of forgiveness and the importance of person-to-person connections in overcoming the legacy of war. During the conference, Fujita met Daniel Inoue, a Japanese-American war hero who had lost his arm fighting in Europe and later became a U.S. Senator. Their conversation was a powerful reminder of the complex nature of war and identity. Inoue shared his own struggles with being seen as an enemy in the country he was fighting for, while Fujita spoke of his journey from seeing Americans as faceless enemies to forming deep friendships with the people of Brookings. This encounter left a lasting impression on Fujita. He began to see his mission of reconciliation as part of a larger, global movement towards peace and understanding. He returned to Japan with renewed energy and a broader perspective on his role in promoting international friendship. In the years that followed, Fujita's life fell into a new rhythm. He balanced his work as a tour guide, a job he had taken to support his family, with his growing commitments as a peace advocate. His employers, recognizing the value of his unique experiences, often allowed him time off for speaking engagements and visits to the United States. Fujita's second visit to Brookings came in 1967, 5 years after his initial trip. This time, he brought his wife and son with him, eager to share with them the warmth and friendship he had experienced. The town welcomed the Fujita family with open arms, organizing a special reception that brought together many of the people Nobuo had met on his first visit. One of the most poignant moments of this trip came when Fujita visited the local high school. In the audience were the children of some of the firefighters who had responded to his bombing raid 25 years earlier. As Fujita spoke about his experiences and his hopes for peace, he could see in these young faces the promise of a new generation unburdened by the hostilities of the past. During this visit, Fujita also spent time with local historian Annette Hall, who had been instrumental in arranging his first trip to Brookings. Together, they began to discuss ways to formalize the connection between Brookings and Japan. Their conversations laid the groundwork for what would eventually become a robust student exchange program. As Fujita's family prepared to return to Japan, his son, Yasuyoshi, remarked on how different the reality of America was from the images he had seen in movies and on television. This observation reinforced Fujita's belief in the importance of personal connections and cultural exchange in promoting international understanding. Back in Japan, Fujita's efforts to promote peace and reconciliation were gaining more attention. In 1968, he was invited to participate in a documentary about World War II veterans who had become advocates for peace. The film, titled From Enemies to Friends, featured interviews with former soldiers from various countries, exploring their journeys from wartime hostility to post-war reconciliation. Fujita's segment of the documentary focused on his bombing mission and his subsequent visits to Brookings. The filmmakers also traveled with him to Oregon, capturing on camera his emotional reunions with friends in the town and his reflections as he walked through the forest he had once tried to burn. The documentary was well received in Japan and was even broadcast on American public television. For many viewers, Fujita's story provided a powerful example of how individuals could play a role in healing the wounds of war. As the 1970s dawned, Fujita found himself increasingly in demand as a speaker and peace advocate. He was invited to universities, international conferences, and community events across Japan and occasionally overseas. While he still sometimes struggled with public speaking, he pushed himself to accept these invitations, driven by his commitment to spreading a message of peace and reconciliation. In 1971, Fujita was approached by a publisher interested in creating a book about his experiences. Although initially hesitant about the idea, Fujita eventually agreed, seeing it as another opportunity to reach a wider audience with his message of peace. The process of writing the book, which he titled From Enemy to Friend, a Japanese pilot's journey of reconciliation, was both challenging and cathartic for Fujita. It required him to delve deep into his memories of the war, his bombing mission, and the transformative power of his experiences in Brookings. Working with a ghostwriter, Fujita spent months recounting his story, often finding himself moved to tears as he revisited both painful and joyful moments from his past. The book was published in 1972 and became a modest bestseller in Japan. It was later translated into English and published in the United States, where it found an audience among those interested in World War II history and stories of personal transformation. One particularly moving chapter of the book detailed Fujita's evolving relationship with nature, especially forests. He wrote about how his perception of forests had changed from seeing them as a strategic target during the war to viewing them as symbols of resilience and renewal. He described the emotion he felt when planting trees in Brookings, an act that he saw as a way of giving back to the land he had once sought to destroy. The success of the book led to more speaking engagements and media appearances for Fujita. He appeared on talk shows in Japan and the United States, always using these platforms to emphasize the importance of peace and cross-cultural understanding. In 1973, Fujita's efforts received official recognition from the Japanese government. He was awarded the Order of the Rising Sun, a prestigious honor given for distinguished achievement in international relations. The award citation praised Fujita's tireless efforts in promoting friendship between Japan and the United States. While deeply honored by this recognition, Fujita remained humble. In his acceptance speech, he emphasized that the true heroes were the people of Brookings, whose capacity for forgiveness had made his journey of reconciliation possible. As Fujita's profile rose, he began to receive letters from people around the world who had been touched by his story. Many were from war veterans who, like him, were struggling to come to terms with their wartime experiences. Others were from young people inspired by his message of peace. One letter, in particular, stood out. It was from a young American soldier serving in Vietnam, who had read about Fujita in a magazine article. The soldier wrote about his growing disillusionment with the war and how Fujita's story had given him hope that someday reconciliation might be possible between those who were currently enemies. Fujita was deeply moved by this letter and many others like it. He began to correspond regularly with some of these individuals, offering words of encouragement and sharing his own experiences of finding peace and purpose in the aftermath of war. In 1975, Fujita embarked on his most ambitious project yet. Inspired by the student exchange programs he had seen in other cities, he proposed establishing a formal exchange program between Brookings and his hometown in Japan. He envisioned this as a way to build lasting bridges between the two cultures and to ensure that the spirit of reconciliation would continue into future generations. Fujita threw himself into this project with characteristic dedication. He worked tirelessly to secure funding, navigate bureaucratic hurdles, and drum up support on both sides of the Pacific. His efforts paid off in 1976 when the first group of American students from Brookings arrived in Japan. Fujita was there to greet the students at the airport, his face beaming with pride and emotion. As he watched these young Americans take their first steps on Japanese soil, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment. This, he thought, was the culmination of everything he had been working towards since that first visit to Brookings in 1962. The exchange program was a success from the start. The American students were warmly welcomed by their Japanese host families, and they returned home with a new appreciation for Japanese culture and a deeper understanding of the human connections that transcend national boundaries. The following year, a group of Japanese students made the journey to Brookings. For many of them, it was their first time traveling abroad, and the experience was transformative. They were particularly moved by their visits to the sites related to Fujita's bombing mission and subsequent reconciliation. One of the Japanese students, a girl named Yuki, wrote in her journal, "Standing in the forest that Fujita-san once bombed, I was overwhelmed by the power of forgiveness. The trees here have grown tall and strong, just like the friendship between our two countries. I feel honored to be a part of this story." As the exchange program grew and flourished, Fujita remained deeply involved. He often met with the students before and after their trips, sharing his story and emphasizing the importance of their role as young ambassadors of peace and understanding. In 1978, Fujita made another significant trip to the United States, this time to participate in a peace conference at the United Nations in New York. The conference brought together former enemies from various conflicts around the world, all of whom had worked towards reconciliation in the years since their wars had ended. Fujita's speech at the conference was perhaps his most powerful yet. He spoke of his journey from a young pilot, filled with nationalistic fervor, to a man dedicated to international friendship. He emphasized the role of personal connections in overcoming the divisions of war, using his relationship with the people of Brookings as a powerful example. War dehumanizes the enemy. Fujita told the assembled delegates, "Peace requires us to rediscover our shared humanity. This is not always easy, but it is always possible. I stand before you today as living proof of this truth." His words resonated deeply with the audience, many of whom were moved to tears. Several delegates approached Fujita after his speech, eager to share their own stories and to learn more about how they could promote reconciliation in their own communities. As the 1970s drew to a close, Fujita found himself reflecting on the incredible journey his life had taken. From a young pilot embarking on a dangerous mission to bomb enemy territory, he had become an internationally recognized advocate for peace and reconciliation. Yet, despite all the accolades and attention he had received, Fujita remained fundamentally the same humble, thoughtful man he had always been. In 1980, Fujita returned to Brookings for what would be his fifth visit to the town. This time, he was accompanied by a group of Japanese students participating in the exchange program he had helped establish. As he watched these young people interact with their American counterparts, Fujita felt a profound sense of hope for the future. During this visit, Fujita participated in a special ceremony in which he helped plant a peace garden in the town park. As he carefully placed a young cherry tree into the soil, he was struck by the symbolism of the moment. Just as this tree would grow and blossom in the years to come, so too would the bonds of friendship between Japan and the United States continue to strengthen and flourish. As he stood up, brushing the dirt from his hands, Fujita caught the eye of Bill McChesney, one of the firefighters who had responded to his bombing raid all those years ago. The two men shared a silent moment of understanding, both marveling at the strange and wonderful twist of fate that had brought them to this point. Later that evening, at a community dinner held in his honor, Fujita surprised everyone by picking up a guitar and singing a traditional Japanese folk song. His voice, though not particularly strong, was filled with emotion as he sang of the beauty of cherry blossoms and the transience of life. As the last notes faded away, the room erupted in applause, with many wiping tears from their eyes. This moment of cultural exchange, simple yet profound, exemplified everything Fujita had been working towards. It showed how music, like so many other aspects of human culture, could bridge the gaps between nations and bring people together in a shared appreciation of beauty and emotion. As the 1980s progressed, Fujita began to scale back his public appearances due to his advancing age. However, his commitment to promoting peace and understanding remained as strong as ever. He continued to correspond with friends in Brookings and to mentor young people interested in international relations. In 1985, Fujita received news that touched him deeply. The town of Brookings had decided to name a small park after him. Fujita Park, as it would be called, was to be a place of reflection and remembrance, a physical testament to the power of reconciliation. Although his health prevented him from attending the park's dedication ceremony in person, Fujita sent a heartfelt letter to be read at the event. In it, he wrote, "This park is not just an honor for me, but a tribute to the spirit of forgiveness and friendship that exists between our two nations. May it serve as a reminder to future generations that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope for peace and understanding." The creation of Fujita Park marked a new chapter in the ongoing story of reconciliation between Brookings and Japan. It became a popular spot for both locals and visitors, many of whom would sit on the benches and reflect on the extraordinary tale of the enemy pilot, who became a beloved friend. In 1987, Fujita celebrated his 76th birthday. Despite his advanced age, his mind remained sharp and his passion for promoting peace undiminished. He spent much of his time in quiet reflection, writing his memoirs and corresponding with friends both in Japan and abroad. His home had become a kind of unofficial museum, filled with photographs, letters, and mementos from his many visits to Brookings and his peace-building efforts around the world. That same year, Fujita received an unexpected visit from a young American journalist named James Bradley. Bradley, whose father had been one of the Marines who raised the flag on Iwo Jima, was working on a book about World War II and had become fascinated by Fujita's story. Over the course of several days, Fujita shared his experiences with Bradley, speaking candidly about his wartime actions, his journey of reconciliation, and his hopes for the future. These conversations had a profound impact on Bradley, who later wrote, "Sitting in Fujita's living room, listening to him speak of war and peace with such wisdom and humility, I felt as if I was in the presence of a modern-day samurai, not a warrior, but a man of honor and peace." As the 1980s drew to a close, Fujita's health began to decline, but his spirit remained strong. He continued to receive letters from people around the world who had been touched by his story. One particularly moving letter came from a group of high school students in Brookings who had recently completed a project on World War II. "Dear Mr. Fujita," the letter began, "we want you to know that your story has changed the way we think about war and peace. You've shown us that it's possible to overcome hatred and build friendship, even with those we once called enemies. We promise to carry your message of peace forward into our own lives." Fujita was deeply moved by this letter, seeing in it the fulfillment of his lifelong mission to promote understanding between future generations. He dictated a heartfelt reply, encouraging the students to continue working for peace in their own ways. In 1990, despite his fragile health, Fujita made what he knew would likely be his final journey to Brookings. At 79 years old, he was determined to see once more the town and the people who had played such a crucial role in his life's journey. The welcome he received was as warm as ever. The town organized a special reception in his honor, attended by old friends and new admirers alike. Among those present were some of the children and grandchildren of the people Fujita had first met on his initial visit in 1962. It was a powerful reminder of how his story had touched multiple generations. During this visit, Fujita spent a quiet afternoon in the forest near Mount Emily, the site of his bombing mission nearly 5 decades earlier. Accompanied by a small group of friends, including Bill McChesney, the former firefighter, Fujita walked slowly among the towering trees. The forest, once his target, had become a place of profound peace and reflection for him. As they stood in a small clearing, Fujita turned to his companions and said, "When I dropped those bombs, I never imagined I would one day walk in this forest as a friend. The trees have grown tall and strong since then. May the friendship between our peoples grow in the same way." Before leaving Brookings, Fujita made a special request. He asked that after his death, some of his ashes be scattered in this forest. "This place," he said, "has become as much a part of me as my hometown in Japan. It is fitting that part of me should remain here." The town council, deeply moved by this request, unanimously agreed to honor it when the time came. Returning to Japan after this final visit, Fujita felt a sense of completion. He had come full circle, from enemy pilot to honored friend. Though his body was weakening, his spirit was at peace. In the years that followed, Fujita's story continued to inspire people around the world. In 1991, a Japanese television network produced a documentary about his life, focusing on his relationship with Brookings. The film, titled From Bombers to Cherry Blossoms, was broadcast in both Japan and the United States, introducing Fujita's remarkable journey to a new generation. The documentary featured interviews with Fujita, now in his 80s, as well as with residents of Brookings and historians from both countries. It painted a vivid picture of how one man's quest for reconciliation had blossomed into a lasting friendship between two former enemy nations. One of the most poignant moments in the film came when Fujita, looking directly into the camera, said, "War is a terrible thing, but what comes after can be beautiful if we have the courage to reach out to one another. This is a lesson I have learned in my life, and it is what I want to leave to the world." The film's success led to renewed interest in Fujita's story. Schools in both Japan and the United States began incorporating his experiences into their history curricula, using his journey as a way to teach students about the long-term impacts of war and the power of reconciliation. In 1992, to mark the 50th anniversary of his bombing mission, Fujita was invited to participate in a special peace ceremony in Washington, D.C. Though his health prevented him from attending in person, he sent a recorded message that was played at the event. In the message, Fujita reflected on the half-century that had passed since that fateful day in 1942. He spoke of the transformative power of forgiveness and the importance of building bridges between former enemies. His words resonated deeply with the audience, which included diplomats, veterans, and peace activists from around the world. As Fujita entered his twilight years, he found comfort in the knowledge that his life's work would continue beyond his own lifetime. The student exchange program he had helped establish between Brookings and Japan was thriving, with dozens of young people participating each year. Many of these students, inspired by Fujita's story, went on to pursue careers in international relations, diplomacy, and peace studies. In 1995, Fujita received word that a group of these exchange students, both American and Japanese, had come together to form the Fujita Peace Foundation. The foundation's mission was to promote international understanding and reconciliation, carrying forward the work that Fujita had begun. When Fujita learned of this, he was overcome with emotion. "I never sought to create a legacy," he said to his daughter, Yuriko. "I only wanted to make amends and build friendships. But if my story can inspire others to work for peace, then perhaps my life has had some meaning after all." In 1996, as his health continued to decline, Fujita began to put his affairs in order. He spent long hours with Yuriko, sharing memories and imparting final wishes. He emphasized his desire for some of his ashes to be scattered in the forest near Brookings, a request that Yuriko promised to fulfill. Fujita also worked on a final letter to the people of Brookings, which he asked to be read after his death. In this letter, he expressed his deep gratitude for the friendship and forgiveness he had received, and his hope that the bonds between Brookings and Japan would continue to strengthen in the years to come. On September 30th, 1997, Nobuo Fujita passed away peacefully in his home, surrounded by his family. He was 85 years old. News of his death was met with an outpouring of grief and appreciation from around the world. In Brookings, flags were flown at half-mast in honor of the man who had once been their enemy and had become their cherished friend. In accordance with his wishes, a portion of Fujita's ashes were brought to Brookings the following year. On a crisp autumn day, much like the one on which he had dropped his bombs 56 years earlier, a small group gathered in the forest near Mount Emily. Yuriko Fujita, accompanied by friends from both Japan and Brookings, scattered her father's ashes among the trees. As the ashes settled onto the forest floor, Bill McChesney, the former firefighter who had responded to Fujita's bombing and had become one of his closest American friends, spoke quietly. "Nobuo would have liked this," he said. He always said that the forest was where he felt closest to understanding the true meaning of peace. The ceremony was simple but deeply moving. Participants shared memories of Fujita and reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them all together. As the group stood in silent reflection, a gentle breeze rustled through the trees, as if nature itself was offering a final salute to this remarkable man. In the years since Fujita's passing, His legacy has continued to grow and evolve. The Fujita Peace Foundation has expanded its activities, sponsoring scholarships, organizing cultural exchanges, and hosting an annual peace conference that brings together people from around the world to discuss issues of war, reconciliation, and international understanding. In 2002, to mark the 60th anniversary of Fujita's bombing mission, the town of Brookings organized a special memorial service. The event attracted visitors from across the United States and Japan, including diplomats, historians, and many who had been touched by Fujita's story over the years. During the service, Fujita's final letter to the people of Brookings was read aloud. His words, infused with gratitude and hope, moved many in the audience to tears. My dear friends in Brookings, as I reach the end of my life, my thoughts turn often to you and to the incredible journey we have shared. When I first came to your town in 1962, I came as a former enemy, burdened by guilt and uncertainty. You welcomed me with open arms and open hearts, showing a capacity for forgiveness that I had not dared to hope for. Over the years, your friendship has been a constant source of inspiration and joy in my life. You have taught me the true meaning of reconciliation and shown me that it is possible to transform even the darkest chapters of history into a foundation for peace and understanding. My greatest hope is that the bonds we have forged will continue to grow and strengthen in the years to come. May the story of our friendship serve as a reminder to future generations that peace is always possible, even in the aftermath of war. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for the gift of your forgiveness and friendship. Though I may no longer be with you in body, know that my spirit will forever remain among the trees of your beautiful forest, a silent witness to the power of human goodness. With eternal gratitude and affection, Nobuo Fujita. The letter served as a powerful reminder of Fujita's enduring message of peace and reconciliation. It also sparked renewed interest in his story, leading to the publication of several new books and documentaries about his life in the years that followed. In 2010, the Brookings Harbor High School unveiled a permanent exhibit dedicated to Fujita's story. The exhibit features photographs, letters, and artifacts related to the bombing mission and subsequent reconciliation, providing a tangible link to this remarkable chapter in the town's history. The exhibit has become a popular destination for both locals and tourists, many of whom are drawn by the powerful message of forgiveness and redemption that Fujita's story represents. Teachers from the high school often bring their students to the exhibit, using it as a starting point for discussions about war, peace, and the possibility of change. In 2012, on the 70th anniversary of Fujita's bombing mission, a group of Japanese and American students came together to create a peace mural in Brookings. The mural, which adorns the wall of a downtown building, depicts scenes from Fujita's life, from the bombing mission to his visits to Brookings and his later work for peace. The mural project was a testament to the ongoing impact of Fujita's legacy. As one of the student artists, a young woman from Japan named Sakura, explained, "Working on this mural, I felt like I was part of something bigger than myself." Fujita-san's story shows us that it's possible to overcome the divisions of the past and create a better future. That's what we tried to capture in our art. In recent years, Fujita's story has taken on new relevance in a world still grappling with conflict and division. Peace activists and conflict resolution experts have studied his journey as a model of personal and societal reconciliation. His experiences have been cited in international peace negotiations as an example of how former enemies can move beyond hostility to build genuine friendship. The student exchange program that Fujita helped establish continues to thrive, with hundreds of young people from Japan and Oregon participating over the years. Many of these exchange students have gone on to careers in international relations, diplomacy, and peace studies, citing Fujita's story as a source of inspiration. In 2017, 20 years after Fujita's passing, the Japanese government posthumously awarded him the Order of the Rising Sun, Gold and Silver Star, one of the country's highest honors. The award recognized Fujita's significant contributions to promoting friendship between Japan and the United States. At the award ceremony in Tokyo, the Japanese foreign minister spoke of Fujita's legacy. Nobuo Fujita's life teaches us that even in the darkest of times, there is always the possibility of light. His journey from enemy pilot to ambassador of peace serves as an inspiration not just to Japan and America, but to all who strive for a more peaceful world. As we approach the present day, Nobuo Fujita's story continues to resonate. In a world often divided by cultural, political, and ideological differences, his life stands as a powerful reminder of our shared humanity and the transformative power of forgiveness. The forest near Brookings, where Fujita's ashes were scattered, has become a place of pilgrimage for those inspired by his story. Visitors from around the world come to walk among the towering trees, reflecting on the extraordinary tale of the enemy pilot who became a beloved friend. In 2022, to mark the 80th anniversary of Fujita's bombing mission, the towns of Brookings and Fujita's hometown in Japan organized a joint online peace conference. The event brought together historians, peace activists, and descendants of those involved in the original events to discuss the ongoing relevance of Fujita's legacy in the 21st century. One of the speakers at the conference was Fujita's granddaughter, Aya, who had followed in her grandfather's footsteps to become an advocate for international understanding. In her speech, she reflected on the personal impact of her grandfather's legacy. Growing up, I knew my grandfather as a kind and gentle man who loved to tell stories. It was only as I got older that I began to understand the full significance of his life's journey. His story has shaped my own path, inspiring me to work towards building bridges between cultures and nations. In today's world, where division and conflict still persist, I believe my grandfather's message of reconciliation and hope is more important than ever. As we conclude our exploration of Nobuo Fujita's remarkable life, we're left with a profound question. What lessons can we draw from his journey that might help us navigate the challenges of our own time? How can we, in our own lives and communities, work towards a kind of reconciliation and understanding that Fujita and the people of Brookings achieved? Fujita's story reminds us that change is possible, even in the most unlikely circumstances. It teaches us that the cycle of hatred and revenge can be broken, but it requires courage, compassion, and a willingness to see the humanity in those we once considered enemies. As we face the complex challenges of the 21st century, from international conflicts to cultural divides within our own societies, Fujita's legacy offers a beacon of hope. It shows us that personal connections and genuine efforts at understanding can transform relationships and heal even the deepest wounds. In the end, perhaps the most powerful aspect of Fujita's story is its simplicity. It is, at its heart, a tale of one man's journey from enemy to friend, from war to peace. Yet in that individual journey lies a universal message that each of us has the power to be an agent of reconciliation, to build bridges where there were once only walls. As we look to the future, we can draw inspiration from Nobuo Fujita's life. We can strive, in our own ways, to promote understanding, to seek reconciliation where there is conflict, and to believe in the possibility of peace even in the darkest of times. In doing so, we honor not just the memory of Nobuo Fujita, but the enduring spirit of hope and human connection that his story represents. And perhaps, in our own small ways, we can continue the work he began, the never-ending task of building a more peaceful and understanding world. Yendi,